In our lives, there is an ever-existing fact. Subjectivity and objectivity are two things that we use to assess issues, objects, or particular items of interest. These tools define how we look at things. They can be used one at a time or in tandem with each other. They are ever-existing, and we will always use either or both of them at any given time when assessing something. Objectivity is an assessment of an item or an issue without acknowledgement of bias or emotion. Subjectivity is an assessment or viewpoint based on opinions or emotions or biases. Obviously, I'm talking about these subjects in terms of human assessment, not anything else. There are many uses for these words. Some use subjectivity as meaning insignificant, and some use objectivity as meaning truth. However, these are not the common ways of using these concepts. As I already stated, I will be using these words in reference to assessment. Some people will use these words as absolutes. For example, some people will say that everything is either objective or subjective. Either way, this is incorrect. Both of these things, and I repeat, both of these things are used in almost every single form of assessment. If everything was based on objective qualities, then phrases such as I like or in my opinion would not exist. On the opposite end, if everything was based on subjective qualities, then we would not be able to make assessments based on tangible information, and we would not be able to trust professional opinions because they would all be biased. What I mean by this is, since subjectivity is based on biases and emotion, then if everything was subjective, then every assessment would not be able to be trusted as it would be based on biases instead of objective assessment on tangible information. If either of these scenarios were the case, then we would live in a dark world for assessment. Thankfully, these are not absolutes. They both exist and can often be used in tandem. For example, if I say object X is not good because of reasons A, B, and C, and because of the quality of the object, I do not personally like it. This is me using my objective reasoning to form my subjective opinion. The objective assessment is the logical reasoning, and the subjective assessment, aka my personal bias, is based on my objective assessment. This might be a little confusing, but these are separate. The objective assessment can result in objective conclusion, whereas the subjective assessment can result in subjective conclusions. After this reasoning, it would be reasonable to assume that they can be separate or conjoined. Some people will use these words as absolutes in reference to specific issues. For example, some people will claim that art is purely subjective. This is false. You can base the quality of art on an objective standard. For example, this can be done through assessing which item conveys a particular emotion or message the best. Anything that would seem to be only accessible through subjectivity can be judged through objectivity, even if it doesn't seem so. Just like the fine art example, this can be applied to any other form of art, like movies or video games. For example, Outlast is a form of art. It is a video game, but it can be held up to standards like consistency, linearity compared to other great horror games, or the quality of the story. If you're still not convinced, then as for another example, Rise of Skywalker is this form of art. It is a movie, but it can be held up to standards like consistency, world building, and how well it follows the source material, or how well it was written. And by the way, it does all of these except the world building very poorly. This just shows that even art, which is referred to as purely subjective, can be in the wake of objectivity, just like everything else. On the other hand, some people will claim that art is purely objective. If this were true, then people would not have biases or emotion-fueled opinions on any works of art. This is due to the fact that objectivity and subjectivity are both used and both exist in every form of assessment. Before anyone gets the wrong idea, objective assessments can still be wrong. It is simply an assessment done independent of emotion or bias. They can still be incorrect. If a robot says that water seems to be made out of nitrogen, this robot has no emotion or bias. However, it still assessed the contents of water incorrectly, as water is made out of hydrogen and oxygen. This can be applied to subjective interpretation as well. If I said, in my opinion, I think water is made out of only nitrogen, I would still be wrong, but for whatever reason, it is still a bias-fueled interpretation. Obviously, this works the other way for them as well. Both the bias interpretation and the objective assessment can be correct. It would be idiotic to assume otherwise. So now that we've established that both objectivity and subjectivity can be used in tandem separately, and they both can be correct or incorrect, it is time to put it to use. To give a quick example of what I've established today, I will conduct a quick review of Rise of Skywalker, subjectively and objectively. The Rise of Skywalker is a bombastic movie. It was enjoyable at the least, but infuriating. The movie was fast-paced and at least fun if you don't have a critical eye. That was my subjective opinion. Now for my objective review. The Rise of Skywalker broke Star Wars in many ways. There's no logical reason how Palpatine escaped being exploded twice. If he was a clone, then why was he so damaged? He would not have aged that fast. Why would Palpatine logically release his plans to the galaxy? Why would he not just go conquer them? That is tactically illogical. And if Rey can float, which is what we see her doing in the opening of the movie, then why doesn't she put this ability to use when they were stuck in the quote-unquote quicksand? Force healing is an incredibly straining ability, not to mention it takes years to train for it to be used effectively, but good ol' Rey uses it without consequences. Force lightning is an incredibly hard ability to master. Not many Sith could achieve this, but Rey uses it by accident. Not to mention there are too many fetch quests in this movie and too many items to keep track of. And if the Death Star was incinerated, then why is there a chunk of it just sitting on Endor? How did the incineration of the entire station not destroy the chunk? How did it entering the planet's atmosphere not destroy the chunk? And how did it landing on the planet not destroy the chunk? All of these things would have destroyed the chunk. All of these things have cause immense heat, friction, and destruction to anything that happens to these things. But it's still there, not to mention it still has power, like electrical power. And the whole I am all the Jedi and I am all the Sith thing was idiotic beyond belief. That was never a thing in any Star Wars, canon, legends, it was never a thing. It breaks itself so many times. This movie is overall disappointing, even if I did enjoy laughing at it. It was just disappointing. I do admit that I did end that bit there because I wanted to wail on the Rise of Skywalker, but it did serve the purpose of demonstration. In this video, we've established that objectivity and subjectivity are not absolutes, but they can be used separately or in tandem. We've also established that they can both be either correct or incorrect. Hopefully you learned something from this video about analysis, and remember, I was not talking about objectivity and subjectivity as meaning truth or insignificant respectively, and more videos will be a thing, I promise. Anyways, see ya.